It's the 30th of May. The Media Ukrinform Center is keeping its work. My name is Lina Kushch. We are talking today illegal detention, torture, and slavery, how Russia wages war on the Ukrainian media community. We'll be talking to Tetiana Katrychenko, Executive Director of the Media Institute for Human Rights. Online, we'll have Arnaud Froget, Head of the Investigation Desk at Reporters Without Borders, author of the investigation into the abduction of Dmytro Khyliuk, UNIAN journalist. His father is here with us. We have also here at the panel Oksana Romaniuk, Director of the Institute of Mass Information, and we have the General Secretary of the Union of Journalists of Ukraine. Welcome. At this point, I thought I would share with you the names and portraits of those journalists who are held by the Russian Federation in an unlawful way. Today we have also relatives of the Ukrainian journalists who are still in captivity in the Russian Federation. Let us get down to business. Tetiana, can I turn to you? What crimes is the Russian Federation committing against Ukrainian mass media? How many journalists in general have been abducted? Welcome, everybody. It's an honor, and I am grateful for the fact that there are so many people have come here, including my co-panelists. It's difficult to take the floor first and answer questions like that. I think there will be follow-ups from my colleagues. I will begin with a story. When our Media Initiative for Human Rights began investigating and searching for the fate of Dmytro Khyliuk and other journalists, including other civilians who have been unlawfully detained and are being detained in the occupied territory of Ukraine, people who are deported to the territory of the Russian Federation. It was the end of February of 2022 when the Media Initiative was working online. We understood that the occupation of Kyiv region was very well progressing and people were detained. I wrote a message to Dmytro in the Facebook and its messenger and asking him what was going on in the settlement of Kazavrovichi. He didn't reply in 24 hours and 72 hours, and it became clear that more likely than not, Mr. Khyliuk and the dozens of civilians was detained by the representatives of the Russian Federation, the occupying force. They occupied nearby villages, including Kazarevich. We had quite a restricted amount of information. We didn't understand where Dmytro was being detained, but we did know that the relatives of other civilians were waiting for and searching for their loved ones. My colleague Natalia Bogota and I, and she is present here, we found the telephone and the contacts of the so-called and then nominated by the Russian authorities a representative of the local community at Dmytro. He is being now under the press charges. We called him, we asked about Mr. Khyliuk. At that point in time, it was quite difficult. One, there were a lot of detentions. There was no available information, but at the media initiative, we thought that detention of a journalist, a person who is engaging in the public work, and he was working and is working for the UNIAN media outlet authored by him, and there was information about the occupation, how the Russian weapons arrived, and about their onslaught. We had some expertise in how civilians were detained. We understood that at that point in time we could negotiate. We should do something and exert effort about his release. We learned later, and his father will tell us later, he was deported through the Belarusian territory into the territory of the Russian Federation. Our organization is keeping track of all the cases available as far as the civilian detentions are concerned in all the territories that used to be occupied and have been liberated since then. We know their system. We understand that the Russians were detaining the activists in the first place, former members of the Ukrainian army in the anti-terror operation, and journalists. Dmytro fell under that category. They were interrogated, they were searched, they were taken to the some schools. Some were held in different shelters and holes. As we talk about the Kyiv region, all of them were taken to the Russian Federation. When we talk about the territories that are being occupied today, Kherson region, Zaporizhia region, that they also have seen the media person detained. They are likely to be held at the Russian territory now. I think I've reiterated it for hundreds of times. It is important to understand that the environment and the conditions where they are held are not worthy of inhuman treatment. They did not break any law. They did not oppose occupation in a classical way deemed by the Russian Federation. They were committing and carrying out their duty to inform of the events going on. For such people, Russians put into exclusively difficult environment and conditions. They're held in one person's cells, they're being tortured, they are abused, they don't enjoy the right to communicate with the outer world, they are held excommunicado, they don't have the right to write letters. One of the persons of the media community, including the professional journalists, the effort is made to take advantage of them, to isolate them, to use them as the material for propaganda video and different campaigns. We understand that Russia is taking advantage of such people because they are trying to blackmail Ukraine, and they use them as the something to negotiate for. We talk about international organization of a Red Cross that doesn't live up to its mandate, and they don't do anything to find our people. When we get down to the case of Dmytro, it's a classical example of a person being abducted to the Russian Federation. Occupation lasted for 30 days. He was abducted through the Bryansk region in Belarus. The majority of the citizens detained in the Kyiv region follow the same route. For a long time, for months, the Russian Federation would not confirm the detainees as hundreds of others. They didn't confirm and wouldn't allow even lawyers, even Russian lawyers, trying to get access to them. We agreed with a Russian lawyer who was ready to go to Bryansk region, to the Novosibkiv. She was knocking at the door of the detention center, pre-trial detention center, and the answer was there are no Ukrainians held here, which was a blatant lie. We asked dozens of people released, including our military. We knew that Dmytro was held there, at that detention center. But then Russian would remove the detainees from there, and it took us a long time to identify the place where he was being held. Going back to the very beginning, of course, activists were detained during this long, short occupation, and now during the longer time detentions. We know what's going on in Melitopol, in Berdyansk. We know about the media community personnel being detained or deported to the Russian Federation. As a human rights organization, what matters to us is that the Russian Federation evidently will not be willing or able to free all of them. We demand that all civilians, including journalists, are released with no conditions attached. Dmytro has been held for 2 years now in the territory of Russian Federation. We have initiated this particular event to join the colleagues from the Union of Ukrainian Journalists in saying that media people, journalists, must be separated. We must be talking about them and about their work separately. They were detained for their professional activities because they were searching for and making the information available. We must assist their loved ones, their families, and our colleagues to contact with the international community to make sure that such a pressure towards releasing the media personnel, that it is stronger, it is more powerful, to make sure that our voice is heard in the Russian Federation, and Russia wouldn't have any other way to go but to release them. Thank you. We are focusing on the case of Dmytro Khyliuk. It's a telltale story. Every story is unique. Every story is important. We expect all the journalists to come back. I will turn to you, Mr. Khyliuk. Will you share with us the story of your son, a person who's been detained for 2 years and detained illegally in the Russian Federation? What can I say? I will echo what the previous speaker has mentioned. On the 3rd of February, on the 3rd of March, right at our household, the Russian soldiers, right in our backyard, my son and I were taken, were detained, and we were led. We were shut up in some warehouse. There were warehouses before the war. We spent there 10 days. I was separated from my son. What followed was that I was released, and I saw how Dmytro was detained by the commander, whoever it was. I don't know who he was. And he said, the war will be over soon and you will see your son. It's now for 2.5 years that we don't know where he is. There is no communication with him. I wish we knew something. I wish we received a phone call or a letter. I wish I knew the conditions where and how he's being treated. At the very beginning, he wrote me a message to the effect that I am imprisoned. I have been captured by the Russians. Not a word anymore since then. We don't know about his whereabouts. We don't know anything about the conditions that he is held in. That's all we know. It's for 2.5 years, more than that, more than 2 years. His mother is sick. She's seriously ill. She has suffered a heart attack. She wants to live to the moment to see her son alive. We beg you, we implore you. The international community would do anything to have him released. I don't know what to do. We can't do anything by ourselves. We are old people. We are suffering from illness, but we hope that the international community would deliver, assist us on his release in one way or another. I don't know how, but we are waiting for him. We implore you to help us see him at home. He is not guilty of anything. He was detained right in our backyard with no explanation why he was detained. He is not a combatant. He didn't do anything against Russia. It's only because he was a journalist. That's all I know. Thank you, Sarah. We all wish your son came back as soon as possible. I would like to invite Arnaud Froget, a journalist who has investigated the abduction of Dmytro Khyliuk.
Into the kidnapping of Dmytro Khyliuk, what you conducted so all this time. So please tell us more.
Yes, thank you for this invitation. I'm very moved by the father's speech about his son. We met on several occasions since the investigation started, and we will do everything we can to find Khyliuk, to find Dmytro, to try to have more information about his fate and condition, and hopefully manage to secure his release at some point. I'd also wish, as an introduction, to congratulate everyone here in the audience and in the panel for the work, tremendous work that has been done in Ukraine. Our partner, Oksana, Romaniuk, but also the Media Initiative for Human Rights, who have been doing a very important work to document the fate of journalists being targeted since the large-scale invasion started. As far as Dmytro Khyliuk's case is concerned, we believed it was our role at RSF to investigate this case, because this journalist has absolutely doing nothing to deserve to be kidnapped and brought in captivity and in prison to Russia. His case to my perspective, is very emblematic of the many civilians who have been wrongfully kidnapped and arrested in Ukraine. It's actually, to my mind, and as a Westerner, it seems to me that it's the blind spot of this war. Unfortunately, there are those obviously whose lives have been taken since it all started, but there are also those whose life have been wasted, and Khyliuk is one of them. He is one of many thousands of Ukrainians who are still detained in Russia, some of them for over than 2 years, as it was reminded earlier. It's our understanding that Khyliuk was, soon after he was arrested in Kyiv Oblast, brought to Belarusian and then to Novosivkov pre-detention center. We had numerous witnesses who confirmed that he was there. We even had a witness who was next to his cell, so we have even identified the number of his cell in Novosivkov. He was in cell 42 at the time. We know, thanks to many witnesses, that he was put in solitary confinement for at least 3 months when he was there. Mainly because of his work as a journalist, because Russians who hold him believe that because of his work as a journalist, he might know something about positions and stuff like this. So his very work as a journalist brought him in special condition, bad treatment when he was in Novosivkov, unfortunately. We tried to follow his track. We found other witnesses and other information in the past year that he was transferred from Novosivkov to Volodymyr region, and especially to IK7 Pakino in Russia, to another prison, as many actually civilians detained in Russia are facing. They are sometimes moved from one prison cell to another, and sometimes from one prison facility to another. Russian has put a wall of lies into this case. It took them 2 years to recognize that they have him in detention. They never recognized that he was in Novosivkov. They never recognized that he was in Volodymyr region in IK7 Pakino, but we know for a fact that he was, because it was documented by numerous information and witnesses. It's very hard to know where he's detained now. Nor ICRC nor neither our contacts and sources have been able to locate him for over a year now, unfortunately. We don't believe he's still in IK7 Pakino, but we are trying to locate him to find new information about him. It's very difficult to locate Ukrainian prisoners in Russia. They are detained in over 40 prison facilities. So it's very hard to find them. We're talking about thousands of people that are displaced in all the Russian territory. So we will do everything we can to find new information. I cannot promise as fathers that we will find any more information anytime soon, but we are actively working on this case, as many others organizations in Ukraine are doing. What I would also mention, because I think it's very important and it tells a lot about this war, is the complete insanity and nonsense of abducting someone who actually was quite sympathetic and had some kind of connection with Russia. And not only Dmytro Khyliuk is not an enemy of Russia, obviously, but he was actually graduated from Russian literature. When we visited his parents' place, you could see that this person had connection or interest to Russia. He was listening to Russian rock music. So it tells a lot about how much the connection between Russia and Ukraine is now spoiled and deteriorated, maybe for a very long time, if even those who had connection and sympathetic connection to Russia are facing this kind of treatment after being abducted, arrested, and detained. So we will do everything we can to find him, to find new information about him. We are still working on this, and hopefully we will get new information. The last piece of news we had recently that does not concern Dmytro Khyliuk directly, but that concerns the people who hold him hostage, with the fact that one of the commander who was dispatched in Hostomel when Khyliuk was arrested alongside with his father, was actually killed in Russia a few days, weeks ago. So obviously this is not what we're looking for. We're looking for justice. We're looking for those who are responsible for this massive abductions and detentions, but this unfortunately is taking a while. This is a very hard job to find people. This is a very hard task to investigate those cases. But it's our duty to do that. And again, I would like to welcome and thank the many organizations in Ukraine who are doing a fantastic job to document these crimes committed on Ukrainian territories and against Ukrainians, because it's not only important for the families and for the journalists and for the civilians who are concerned, it's important for history. And the work that we're collectively doing here will stick to history book, and this will allow next generations and future generations to know exactly what happened, even to the smallest individual cases, and unfortunately there are thousands of them.
Thank you, Mr. Froget. Пані Ліно, хочеться...
Lina, can I turn to you? The Union of Journalists of Ukraine, what do you know about the Ukrainian journalists detained and captured by the Russians? I know that the fate of many is unknown. I appreciate this event, and I thank the Media Initiative for Human Rights for their events and what they do. As a Union of Journalists of Ukraine, we are the first instance of contacts for our foreign friends on the matters of the unlawful detentions of our journalists. We stay in contact with the families of our journalists, men and women. For example, we've been to Dmytro Khyliuk's father's home. We got acquainted with his mother. We heard this painful story. Recently, we have received information from Victoria Roshina, a Ukrainian journalist, to the fact that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation has confirmed the fact that Victoria is now in the territory of the Russian Federation and she has been imprisoned. We are staying in touch with Sergei Tsegipa. His wife, Olena, is here in the audience with us. We were the first to inform when he was abducted from Simferopol in Crimea. We cannot possibly imagine what our friend went through. I am sharing with you our leaflets that we signed at the World Day of Free Press. And this is the way we showed our solidarity with our imprisoned colleagues. Irina Levchenko. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about her for many months on row now. No information on how and where she is detained. We recently we have seen a Congress of the Journalists of the World, the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, suggested a common appeal to support the Ukrainian journalists that have been detained, with a demand, first, that the associations and unions of journalists in other countries comprising more than 300,000 journalists, to help us pressure Russia through their journalists and diplomats to exert pressure on Russia to release our journalists. I agree that journalists are a special group, a special category of the Ukrainian civilians that are held in Russian captivity. I have come here following another event. We are holding a workshop for families of the missing persons and the prisoners of war and the civilian captives. When we spoke with the representatives of the Coordination Center and the Human Rights Ombudsman from the Parliament, what we talked about was how can we put together a mechanism of receiving information. How can we communicate such an issue in general? As for the illegally imprisoned journalists, we are facing a huge problem. That is the no access to them if they don't have any relatives in the occupied territories. No one can receive any information about their whereabouts. Relatives, of course, find it difficult to establish contact too because people are held excommunicado. In case we talk about the recently occupied territories in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, the problem there is that there are no lawyers available there who are versed in the Russian legislation. To identify a lawyer who would defend our colleague, whether he or she who has been detained there, you have to find a specialist agreeing to come from Russia or from Rostov region to visit them and to participate in the trial. The role of such a lawyer is not to defend. We understand we don't stand any chance there. The role is to confirm the fact that our journalists are held right there. The role is to share and to apply with necessary documents that is in line with the Russian legislation. For one thing, it's very expensive. For the other, it's difficult to find such a person. We are often asked, what is the result of your actions of solidarity, of your calls for solidarity? The result, the journalists are not freed anyway. The result is that to make sure that this issue is high on the agenda. It's not our role. We want this to be high on the international agenda, high on the agenda of every international meeting or gathering. We should not cease our actions. I appreciate the actions and acts of all who have joined us or are joining us. We support the families of our journalists, and we thank those who support our detainees. Those who have been released say that such an information campaign is helpful. It even can make their sufferings easier. If we today call for the release of all our colleagues, including Mr. Khyliuk, this information gets through to where it must be heard. Ms. Oksana, representing the Institute for Mass Information, what do you do to protect the rights of the illegally detained civilians? Thank you. One thing we know about 29 civilian Ukrainian journalists that are illegally detained in Russia. I cannot call this imprisonment or capturing. Prisoners of war is a military term. These are people who are held captive against any law. 4 of our colleagues who have joined the armed forces of Ukraine are now in Russia in illegal captivity. Since the day one of the intervention. We know about 20 cases of journalists who have been captured and then released. You know these cases well, but Turin, the settlement of Rogatin, Anatoly, and other colleagues of ours. In addition, there are dozens of cases that are not public. We don't say anything about them because of the security and safety concerns. We coordinate our actions with the Ukrainian law enforcement. For you to understand the scope, since 2014, more than 100 journalists have been to the Russian detention places in Russia and elsewhere. What Russia is doing is unequivocally a crime. I will say that this is part of the genocidal crimes because we are witnessing the filtration process where people are filtrated, including the civilians, and vetted for some information. That's why we appreciate the Reporters Sans Frontiers in investigating the Dmytro Khyliuk case, a colleague of ours who we respect so high, a heroic Ukrainian journalist. The Reporters Without Borders have identified a shocking information saying that international, whatever they call it, Association of the Red Cross had access to Mr. Khyliuk. We want to take advantage of this information, to ask this information without beating around the bush, asking this Red Cross organization at the Parliamentary Assembly next year. We'll see a meeting and we will raise the issue. The work is activated. We are working with the Office of the General Prosecutor of Ukraine in this area. We have shared all the information that has been documented, and they're investigating this case and looking into these cases in terms of proving the genocide war crime, because genocide is the gravest crime in international humanitarian law. We are working with Mr. Yurchyshin as well. We have shared information with them too. He made sure that the Ukrainian parliament passed a resolution to the effect that we have recorded the detention of journalists as civilians. It's important for international lobbying and activists. You see, international organizations cannot organize only sit-ins. They might engage the mechanism that they have at their disposal. We don't know where Khyliuk is. We don't know where Russian is. We don't know where Irina Leshchenko is. This is abnormal. I would like to address the donor community as well. Yesterday, I received a letter. I wouldn't tell you who from, but they are relatives of the journalist who is in the Russian captivity. This person needs financial help and assistance. I would like the international donor community to implement or initiate any kind of assisting the families whose loved ones are in Russian captivity. It would be a practical step of showing the solidarity and support of these people. I thank you, colleagues. I thank my international colleagues, government bodies, and Ukrainian parliamentarians. I admire your strength, Mr. Khyliuk, and I feel for you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, you can feed the questions from the floor. Welcome. Katrychenko, Marina, Ukrinform. My question is as follows. You have mentioned today a decree passed in the Ukrainian parliament appealing to the international community to assist in freeing Ukrainian journalists. How can you assess its efficiency? How will it impact the international community? And second point is that you mentioned the assistance support of the detained journalists. In what way does Ukrainian government support such families? Are there projects in place? Let me comment on that decree. That was a very important document in the Ukrainian parliament because it serves as a basis for the sitting at Strasbourg in the PACE. It's not any non-governmental organization talking to other NGO. We are talking to government. It's a serious step forward. This is an important decree. We believe this will be an instrument in our toolkit to keep on working. As for the support of the families, I can assure you the government is supporting the families of the detained journalists in the sum of 100,000 hryvnia. It's not that much, of course. If you have to pay for a lawyer, a Russian lawyer, who agrees to defend a Ukrainian journalist, this will cover 1/3 of what the lawyer will expect. It's not that much. As for the emergency support, it is granted by a number of international organizations. The list of the conditions are there, including the Reporters Sans Frontier. So there are international organizations helping us. It's done on the individual appeals, of course. Let me also follow up. When we talk about financial support, important though it is, the support by the state, the issue of freedom for the captured journalists is the help number one. When we talk about some parliamentary ordinance, resolution, and so on, that is one of the steps towards exerting international pressure upon the Russian Federation to free these people. What matters for families is not a financial support, though important it is, but the assistance in their belief that government is standing behind every journalist and the government is fighting for them. Next question will be in English. Sir, you will perhaps need an interpretation device.
Добрий день, мене звати Christopher з Netzik Media. First, for Vasyl, I can tell you many Americans and Westerners are with you. And many journalists from around the world will definitely stand with you as a father, Ukrainian, and father of a journalist. So first and foremost. To the other panel, letter writing campaigns have sort of been discussed recently amongst a lot of supporters. What do you think they can do to help from those positions, right to their embassies, right to their leadership, and how do you think those types of campaigns can help? Дуже дякую.
To be honest with you, I have no clue. I am a tractor driver. International organizations. What can they do? What can they do? I don't know specifically, but I'm looking around into this audience. There are well-wishers here. They all wish that journalists were freed, and my son Dmytro amongst them. Specifically, I can't recommend anything. I just don't know. Do your best. Help us. You're wise people. When I was a student of the Institute of Journalism, our director, Mr. Moskalenko, used to say, journalists share the same blood. I believe that support from the journalists throughout the world, their proactive stance, the material they publish, that will be noticed by their governments. That's the best way to pressure Russia into freeing our journalists. Perhaps there are some other questions. You're welcome. Nastasia Moskvichova, the Grata edition. My question is about Dmytro Khyliuk. About a month ago, there was an information available as if Russia had finally agreed to confirm that he was in their territory, but they didn't locate him. Have there been any changes in the information? Perhaps he has been able to pass through some letters or messages. Have been there breakthroughs in this issue? His father says that no news has been received from the Russian Federation as for his whereabouts. That's the way they do. When the Russian Federation detains a Ukrainian citizen, including a journalist, they hold him in the Russian territory and hide their whereabouts. The Russian Federation detained them under no reason, with no charges, without showing anything that these people are being tried. The only government body of the Russian Federation that responds to the Ukrainian party are either Russian lawyers, but the only institution is the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. That ministry sends identical letters to the effect that such a person was detained because he was opposing the so-called special military operation. We were asking Russian lawyers, what is the regulation for such a detention? Are there specific normative acts in the Russian Federation that would give ground to detain Ukrainian citizens in opposing the so-called special military operation? In the public domain, there are no such documents. If there are classified documents, then there is a breach, because such documents must be put in public domain. And as a rule, Russian Federation will not inform us about the whereabouts. The place of detention can be learned only from the witnesses who have come back from the imprisonment in Russia. We know that prisoners of war swaps have not been taking place for some time. These are people who heard about civilians or saw them in next-door cells or on the floor of the building. This is from the former POW. We learned that he was taken from Bryansk Oblast to Volodymyrskaya Oblast. We also know that something is likely that he might be held in Mordovia, but it's very unlikely. We don't know for sure. Roman Koncharuk, Nation Information Outlet. My question is to Tetiana. Do you cooperate with Ms. Romanova, the head of the Rus Sidyashya NGO? She might be better informed than the Red Cross organization. They might help us to identify what Dmytro is. Second question, whether Mr. Khyliuk is a member of the Ukrainian Union of Journalists. As for the first part, Media Initiative does not cooperate with any Russian NGOs or organizations, including the one that you have mentioned. We have our own sources of information. As I have mentioned, these are Ukrainian prisoners of war who have been freed. They are a very good source of information. That's point one. Point number two, we have sources in the Russian Federation. I mentioned that we asked a Russian lawyer to visit the first place of detention of Dmytro. Believe me, we are taking on board all resources available as human rights activists and as journalists. And today our colleague Arnaud mentioned about the international mechanisms that they are engaging. Believe me, we are searching for him. As for this second part, Dmytro Khyliuk is a member of the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. I have been talking a lot about the journalists who have been illegally detained, showing their photographs and enlisting their names. Very often there is a person in the audience who know him as an officer. For example, many military press officers say, oh, I know this guy, I remember him, I remember talking to him. And civilian activists and NGO persons and other popular people remember Dmytro as a professional person of integrity, a journalist of integrity. He is well remembered, well liked for his manners, a tactful person who knew how to break ice with people, and he was a very professional journalist. Let me remind you that in the audience we have families, including Olena Tsehipa, the wife of Sergei Tsehipa. Madam, would you like to share with us your thoughts on what you have heard today? I would like to thank you all for raising the issue that you don't let every Ukrainian journalist be forgotten. They have shown their pro-Ukrainian stance. I'm talking about my particular place, the settlement and city of Novokakhovka. He was a great example because we found ourselves in occupation in the first hours of the invasion. Many people of the pro-Ukrainian worldview didn't know what to do. They were at a loss. They knew the video footage, they had photographs, but they were afraid to share in the public domain the video footage on how many military units entered, where the headquarters is, where the groups were. They channeled that to Sergei, and Sergei published that in his Facebook channel and other channels, and because of his informational resistance, he was taken captive. He's been now transferred to Razyanskaya Oblast, the city of Skopje. Fortunately enough, I am having contact with him, but I am concerned about his state of health. He will turn 63 years this year. He's been sentenced for a 30 years imprisonment. You will understand, under the horrific conditions of all the either civilian or military prisoners, we must cry out. We must knock on every door. We must pressure Russia into stopping the tortures of the civilian, of the military, because it's in violation of all the possible humanitarian laws, agreements, and accords. Thank you, panelists. We believe in justice. We believe that all the illegally detained personnel, military or journalists, will come back home, and those perpetrators will be held to justice. We've been talking about the way Russia wages war against Ukrainian journalists. Thank you for being with us. Glory to Ukraine.